Hey guys, if you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's simply the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor by Spotify has everything you need all in one place. So let me explain. Now, Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your own cell phone or your own computer. Now, I've been using and loving Anchor by Spotify for 2 years now. And don't forget that Anchor will go ahead and distribute your podcast on so many listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and so many, many more. Now, I think it's simply everything you need to make your own podcast, all in one place. And don't forget, Anchor is totally free. So why don't you go ahead and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I can't wait to hear all of your podcasts. Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. This is episode number 10 of season 8. Today is Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, all right, you guys, I'm going to be diving into my Newsworthy feature today, the February 2023 OIG Work Plan. And in my compliance tips and my compliance recommendations today in Trusty Tip, I'm going to be diving into a few of the top denial reasons during a targeted probe and educate review. And I go ahead and round out today's episode in Spark with a remarkable quote on creativity by Criss Jami. If you checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and our valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips, and my compliance recommendations based on my over 12 years of experience in front office, in back end, in coding, and in billing for multi-specialty physicians, in compliance, and in auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. Today's episode is sponsored by Advanced Coding Services, a leading medical billing and medical coding school in the United States. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned professional, our training equips you with the tools and support you need to advance your career. Our medical billing and coding school meets your needs worldwide online or in person with one-on-one support throughout your training. We are committed to helping our alumni and credentialed medical community in keeping up their certifications by offering various avenues for acquiring your continuing education units. In addition to our Mastering the Business of Medicine retreats offered several times throughout the year in different parts of the country, we now offer memberships. You can conveniently earn your CEUs by attending our exclusive members-only webinars. Since our aim is to nurture and grow the careers of individuals who work in the business of medicine, we call our member area the Apple Orchard. Advanced Coding Services, educate, nurture, inspire, reaching back with a hand up. So let's get into Newsworthy. Now, the month of February's OIG Work Plan updates, there are 4. The first OIG Work Plan for February 2023 is titled Bridging Data and Practice, a resource guide for Medicare's enrollment race and ethnicity data. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. In a June 2022 data brief titled Inaccuracies in Medicare's Race and Ethnicity Data Hinder the Ability to Assess Health Disparities, The OIG found that Medicare's enrollment race and ethnicity data are less accurate for some groups, particularly for people identified as American Indian, Alaska Natives, Asian, and Pacific Islanders, or Hispanic. These Medicare enrollment data are the only source of race and ethnicity data for all people enrolled in Medicare, and the accuracy of these data is vital for identifying health disparities and advancing health equity. This resource guide will provide detailed information about the data analyzed in the recent data brief, including the origins of race and ethnicity variables in the enrollment database, the accuracy of the variables when compared to self-reported race and ethnicity data, and considerations for alternative data sources for race and ethnicity analysis. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2023. Now, the second OIG Work Plan update for February 2023 is titled In-Depth Review of Nursing Home Citations Related to the Use of Antipsychotic Drugs. This report is expected from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. The potentially inappropriate use of antipsychotic drugs among nursing home residents remains concerning, despite efforts to decrease their use over the last decade. Antipsychotic drugs were developed to treat schizophrenia, a serious mental disorder that is generally diagnosed before the age of 30. These powerful drugs are known to have severe side effects, particularly among elderly individuals with dementia. In 2008, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, issued a boxed warning against the use of all antipsychotic drugs among elderly individuals with dementia because of the increased risk of death. OIG has raised concerns about the high use of antipsychotic drugs among nursing home residents. In response, CMS took steps to discourage the use of these drugs by, for example, developing publicly reported quality measures related to the use of antipsychotic drugs among nursing home residents. More recently, OIG has raised concerns about the potential falsification of schizophrenia diagnoses to make the use of antipsychotic drugs appear appropriate and avoid federal attention. OIG will conduct an in-depth review of survey reports to, number one, examine the nature of nursing home citations related to the use of antipsychotic drugs, and number two, identify vulnerabilities that contribute to the inappropriate use of these drugs. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the third OIG Work Plan update for February 2023 is titled Securing Medicaid and Medicare Payments to Providers. This report is coming from the Office of Evaluation and Inspections. Federal and state governments reimburse healthcare providers and facilities electronically for providing healthcare services. Sometimes a provider or facility may change financial institutions to receive payment by using an electronic funds transfer, an EFT, authorization request. However, since at least 2020, the OIG has investigated schemes that have allegedly exploited vulnerabilities in EFT authorization forms to redirect provider reimbursements to their own bank accounts. Many state Medicaid agencies and Medicare administrative contractors, or MACs, have been victims of this type of fraud over the past 3 years. OIG will collect information from states and MACs about EFT vulnerabilities and assess the feasibility of possible solutions to strengthen EFT fraud prevention efforts. In addition, OIG will collect information about any actions taken by CMS to address EFT fraud and assess the feasibility of CMS systems playing a role in fraud prevention efforts. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. Now, the fourth and final OIG Work Plan update for February 2023 is titled Audit of Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator. Now, this report is coming from the Office of Audit Services. Substance use disorders, or SUDs, impact the lives of millions of Americans. Drug overdose deaths in the United States increased by 28.5% during the 12-month period ending in April 2021. An individual who experiences a substance use disorder may also experience a co-occurring mental disorder and vice versa. Nearly 1 in 5 US adults, or 52.9 million in 2020, lives with a mental illness. In accordance with the 21st Century Cures Act, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, maintains the Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator, which is a searchable online database of facility locations where individuals can seek substance use disorder and mental health treatment in the United States and U.S. territories. OIG will conduct an audit to determine whether substance use disorder and mental health treatment facilities information in SAMHSA's Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator is accurate. This final report is expected in fiscal year 2024. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So in today's compliance tip, I wanted to dive into a few of the top denial reasons during a targeted probe and educate a TPE review. Now, specifically, I'm going to be diving into the NGS, or National Government Services website, that has great TPE resources and tips that you can find. But if you don't live in this particular jurisdiction, if you don't practice medicine in this particular jurisdiction, be sure and check your local MAC web pages and see where their resources are located. Now, the basics involve confusion on those EOBs, right? Those explanation of benefits or those remittance advice forms that you receive when your claims are processed. So some of those remittance advice codes are going to be located at the bottom of those EOB pages. Now, what that means is that after a medical review nurse reviews and processes a claim, right, either for payment or for denial, the claim is then going to be sent off for final adjudication and given a reason code. And that information is included in your remittance advice. Claim denials are defined by the RARC codes and the CARC codes that are established by CMS. Now, what does that RARC code mean, right? That's for the Remittance Advice Remark Code. RARC is for the Remittance Advice Remark Code. And then what does that CARC mean, right? That stands for the Claim Adjustment Reason Code. So those are the basics of what those two standards are, RARC and CARC. Those are those remark codes that you'll find at the bottom of your remittance advice pages that you receive from CMS after your claims are processed. Now, there are going to be many different denial reasons that lead to that confusion, right? What do those codes actually mean? And we understand their explanations may sometimes, in my opinion, almost always, they're very generic and vague, right? It can definitely lead to confusion. So this particular website for NGS has a lot of detailed information on some of their top denial reasons when conducting these targeted probe and educate reviews. So I'm just going to go over the top 3 that they find. Now, there is a RARC code with N as in Nancy, 115, right? So what does that mean? They're saying that description on your remittance advice form for that RARC code N115, they're going to make a comment there in that description that this decision was based on an LCD, or a local coverage determination. And then that CARC code is going to be the number 50 on that remittance advice form that you receive. And then that description for the CARC number 50 is that these are non-covered services because this is not deemed a medical necessity by the payer. So again, what that means is that the documentation did not support that local coverage determination, right? So that is the true explanation for that very vague description, right, of N115, and this decision was based on an LCD, and then the CARC for number 50, and these are non-covered services because this is deemed a medical necessity by the payer, not covered, non-medically necessary by the payer. So the explanation, of course, when we dig deeper, is that you need to go back and review that LCD, right, in your jurisdiction, and what in the documentation did not support it. So tips to correct this type of an error is to, again, review those coverage guidelines and your patient medical records, right, to determine if all of the appropriate documentation was actually sent in one of those phases for the TPE review, right? And so that may actually, in fact, support the medical necessity. So if all of the relevant records were not submitted and support the medical necessity, consider filing an appeal. So you have the right to do that in the TPE process, or continue on to round two. And in round two of the TPE, definitely send all of the documentation for your next round of review. And then, of course, they also make a comment here for tips to avoid this type of an error, right? Ensure that you are familiar with the coverage guidelines, right, in that LCD, and all of the documentation requirements of that local medical policy for which the service is being billed. And then ensure all Medicare coverage and medical necessity requirements are met and well documented prior to you actually billing out claims. Now, the second top denial reason for TPE reviews are going to be for that RARC code. There are two of them, N as in Nancy 705 and N as in Nancy 706. So the descriptions for those two RARC codes are going to be incomplete, invalid, or missing documentation. So as vague as that, right? Just incomplete, invalid, missing documentation. They don't actually tell you what that missing stuff is. And then that CARC code is number 226. And the description for that is that information requested from the billing rendering provider was not provided, or not provided timely, or was insufficient and incomplete. So you can see where the vagueness comes in to those two code and their descriptions, right? And then the greater explanation is that the particular service was reviewed by the medical review department and did not meet the signature requirements established by Medicare. So you can even have a further description as well for that explanation of those two RARC codes and that one CARC code. So tips to correct for a code like this is, again, to review your coverage guidelines and patient records to determine if all appropriate documentation was sent for the review that may have supported the medical necessity, right? And if, in fact, you do find support, you can consider filing an appeal, or you can go ahead and wait for that round two of your TPE audit to make sure your next batch is going to be sent in properly. Now, tips to avoid this error, right? You must ensure that you're submitting timely and complete supporting documentation to all requests for medical records. Ensure that all relevant records are included in the records sent. So again, you have to be very mindful and look back at that signature page on your documentation, right? Because their greater explanation there was alluding to the fact that perhaps some signature requirements were missing. So you have to go back and provide those signatures. Now, the third and final RARC code in the top denial reasons for TPE reviews here at NGS includes M as in Mary, A as in Apple, and then number 81. So MA 81. And the description for that RARC code is, again, missing, incomplete, invalid provider, supplier signature. So the next CARC code for that is going to be the number 226. And the description for that is that the information requested from the billing rendering provider was not provided, or not provided timely, or was insufficient and incomplete. So again, those things are vague. And then the greater explanation for it is the service was reviewed by the medical review department and did not meet the signature requirements, again, established by Medicare. So again, they're really pointing in and honing in on the fact that this could be a critical missing signature issue. So tips to correct, they advise you to review your documentation to ensure that you've submitted all the records again that are relevant for them to review. If all of the relevant records were not submitted and support the medical necessity, consider filing an appeal, right? And then if the legibility of the handwritten signature, right, that signature scratch is questionable, attach a signature log or a key of some sort that includes the typed name of the provider with their credentials, with their signature, and with their initials, right? And return the request for illegible, missing, or signature attestation within 20 calendar days of receipt. So that's a really good tip that NGS provides you. And then, of course, tips to avoid this error is that you should be ensuring that the legibility of the handwritten signature is there, right? You have to make sure that things are legible. If not, go ahead and make sure that you attach that signature log or that signature key that includes the typed name of the provider with the credentials, the signature, and the initials. So make sure you have an internal policy that you develop at your practice as well if your providers are simply handwriting their signatures and they're illegible, right? You should make a written policy that in addition to that chicken scratch on the documentation, you're actually typing out a signature log or a signature key that you keep on file at the practice. So whenever claims need to be submitted, you can upload things to the MAC directly and they have a copy of that signature log or that signature key. So you can avoid these types of issues in the future. And finally, I focus Season 8 Spark on creativity. I want this 8th season Spark to be filled with our world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for creativity in all we strive to do. So, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from author and poet Criss Jami. Create with the heart, build with the mind. Absolutely true, right? I think this is an amazing quote that reminds us to tap into the heart of creativity. I think this quote reminds us that sometimes creativity is that space where you can use your heart and feel, not overthink. Let your mind come back into play to build from that creative heart. I think this quote inspires us to be bold, to be brave, to be creative. It is with our creativity that our heart and mind are best utilized, that we can best innovate and do more. I am happy Criss Jami's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. If you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. So in my final note today, spring is definitely in the air, and I hope you're finding some time to take those mental health breaks in your workday and get outside, even if it's only to take a quick walk. Breathe it in. Enjoy the sun on your face, your mind clear and open, your heart steady and strong. Wishing you all an amazing week ahead. Thank you so much for listening in on today's episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.